In Oldham County, Kentucky, a reformed criminal named Cash lives in a small shack on his late sister Rachel's farm, while his brother-in-law Finney and teenage niece Savannah live in the main house. Though he abandoned his violent life following Rachel's overdose, Cash is constantly haunted by his violent past, fueled by drugs and alcohol, and hence lives isolated from his peers, fighting invisible battles. As time passes, seeking a reprieve from the internal turmoil of grief and guilt that has taken over his identity, Cash focuses his energy on the farm, hoping to find peace in the mundane rhythm of tending cattle. One Sunday morning, Cash wakes up early, haunted by memories of his former life as an enforcer for Big Cat, the sadistic queenpin who rules the county's underworld, and finds himself unconsciously stroking his scarred right hand, which was the price he paid for wanting out. Then, forcing his mind to snap out of the painful reverie, Cash exercises for a few minutes before riding his dirt bike to the main house. There, Cash finds Savannah immersed in some of her mother's old books and playfully encourages her reading habits before going to wake Finney, whom he finds passed out drunk and surrounded by old family pictures of Rachel. Sympathizing with the grieving husband, Cash initially hesitates to disturb him, but is soon forced to wake him up for the morning feeding of the farm animals. Then, together with Savannah, the men head to the field and tend to their tasks, silently remembering Rachel. A few minutes later, this silence is interrupted by Savannah's excited screams from the stable, announcing that their pregnant mare is in labor. Hearing this, the men rush to the stable, find the horse struggling through difficult labor. Then, seeing that they are running out of time, Finney steps up bravely, guides the foal into the world, and the family welcomes it joyfully. Then, with the morning chores complete, Cash and Savannah prepare to head to church, while Finney opts to stay back and promises to meet them later at the local diner for lunch.
Well, we're just gonna keep asking him.
He just misses Mom. I do too.
At church, Cash is touched by the sermons of a now reformed ex-member of Big Cat's gang, Pastor Wilder, and attentively follows as the pastor teaches about new beginnings. Afterwards, after the pastor catches up with Savannah and Cash, he advises Cash to take Finney hunting to ease his grief. Later, Cash and Savannah head to the local diner, order Finney's favorite meal, and wait for him, but are disappointed when he doesn't show up. And after a couple of hours of waiting, Cash steps out to call and check on him. However, as soon as Cash steps away, Big Cat's goons, brothers nicknamed the Buck and the Doe, surround Savannah and make a nuisance of themselves.
Cash, didn't think you'd mind. Thought he was just having a little bite to eat.
Annoyed, Cash calmly escorts Savannah away and faces the messengers of the life he decisively left behind.
Come here, sweetheart. Go get a dessert tomorrow. It won't be long.
Then, the duo reaches home, finds a drunk Finney dancing to blaring music, and enters curiously. Inside, Cash pulls Finney aside and asks him the burning question on his mind.
How's a drunken dumbass? I used throwing him back for both of us.
Then, the men get into an intense argument about the best way to keep the farm afloat, as Cash fears that in a moment of desperation, Finney had given the devil an inch, for which it will soon return and take a mile. Then, after taking a moment to calm down, Cash assures Finney that he will take care of everything and advises him to cut back on his alcohol consumption and go hunting with Savannah.
All I'm in the mood to shoot is bourbon. I'll do it outside.
Elsewhere, after hearing that Big Cat is cooking meth pills, a couple of junkies named Reggie and Harlan sneak up on her property and, after checking out the setup, plan to return with their crew and rob her blind. However, minutes later, as Reggie surveys the surroundings, he is caught by a man trap and mauled. Shocked, Harlan tries to flee, but he's soon caught by the heavily armed guards. Meanwhile, after weighing the matter seriously and knowing the potential consequences of letting Big Cat down, Cash decides that he needs to do whatever it takes to accrue some money and pay her back. Hence, he drives to the local law firm in town to visit Big Cat's son Zeke so that he can find out how much Finney owes.
I'm sorry, Cash. You seem to be confused. But it's not the kind of debt that you can just walk in and pay.
On the other side of town, while Finney and Savannah spend some time at the ranch, the Buck and the Doe arrive with a few of their colleagues and ambush them. Sent by Big Cat to remind Finney to pay off his debt, the men surround and start attacking him. Unable to bear her father's agony any longer, Savannah vainly tries to intercept them and help him. Desperate, the teenager quickly runs to her bedroom, gets her hunting knife, and attacks the Doe, but is unfortunately captured soon after.
I'm sorry.
Cash arrives at the ranch and is utterly terrified by what transpired. After making sure Finney and Savannah are okay and helping them inside, a desperate Cash rushes out and heads to the sheriff's office. There, Cash speaks to Sheriff Hollister and Deputy Sheriff Duke, and after explaining his situation, asks them for help. After spending the whole day running around town, trying to approach the problem from different angles, find a peaceful solution, and protect Rachel's legacy, to no avail, a desperate Cash decides to return to the lion's den and face Big Cat. There, Big Cat welcomes Cash and confesses that the debt was never about money and could only be paid back through his services.
When I have to send a message a second time, it comes with more volume.
Before Cash can respond to this, Big Cat explains that she's looking to build an empire and needs his skills to reach her goals quickly, and confesses that she's always admired the way he covers his cold and professional skills under a friendly, personable demeanor, which charms and disarms his opponents. Then, Big Cat threatens to kill Finney if Cash refuses to accept her deal and informs him that he can have his ranch back after completing 3 jobs of her choosing. Having no other option, Cash breaks the promise he made to himself and agrees to return to the dark world that once destroyed him. On his way back to the ranch, knowing his boss, Cash wonders if 3 jobs will really be enough to set his family free and decides he must look for a backup way out at any chance he gets. Back at the ranch, Cash finds Finney drinking by a fire, joins him, and after the men bond over their shared grief, Cash comforts the drunk man and promises to always be there for him.
Grown man can't take care of my own land. Couldn't take care of my wife. I'm a little girl.
It's sad to see a broken man admit that. Elsewhere, Big Cat tortures Harlan, hoping to force him to confess to his associates and make an example out of him. Later, in the wee hours of the night, Cash gets a call and receives his first assignment. Dreading what awaits him, Cash joins the buck moments later, and the duo tails Harlan to find out his true intention. Harlan inadvertently leads the duo to his lair, where he reunites with his men and makes a plan for retribution.
5 guys talking about revenge and calling in the boys.
Once the duo gathers enough information, the buck calls his colleagues, and they prepare to ambush the unsuspecting men. Then, the doe orders Cash to guard the back door, gives him a gun, while the rest break through the front door and wipe everyone out. However, outside, as Cash proceeds to stop a fleeing man, he realizes that he was set up, and his gun is not loaded. Thinking on his feet, Cash reacts quickly, tackles the man to the ground, and neutralizes him, before the doe soon arrives and murders him.
My gun wasn't loaded.
Whoops.
When he gets home at dawn, Cash finds Finney pouring out all the alcohol in the house and proudly watches him, hoping with all his heart that it will work out for him this time. Then, as scheduled, despite not sleeping a wink all night, Cash accompanies Finney to go hunting in the woods.
I'm shaking like an old man.
Stay focused on the task.
Later, Cash meets with Pastor Wilder and shares his predicament with the farm. Having been in his place not so long ago, the pastor understandingly hears out the stressed Cash and encourages him not to fall back down the dark side and give himself credit for the tough decisions he's had to make. Appreciating the pastor's advice, Cash opens up about his past and confesses that while working for Big Cat, he, Finney, and Rachel used to get high for days on end, partying like there's no tomorrow, and that at that time, all they had ever cared about was getting their next hit. As the duo continues their discussions, they celebrate their burnt and scarred right hands, which represent their freedom, and each shares their story with the other.
A lot of people never get on the right track. Is that what I'm doing?
A few days later, Cash gets the second call and meets with one of Big Cat's men, named Wes, to complete a massive drug deal.
He'll be coming with us, but he's not coming back.
Moments later, Lazarus arrives, warmly greets the duo, gets in the car, and excitedly describes the upcoming deal. Then, mistaking the duo's stress for nervousness, he tries to calm them down and assures them that he knows the buyers well and will handle everything. A few minutes later, following Lazarus's direction, the trio reaches the meeting spot and started unloading the drugs. But soon, as Lazarus starts noticing that something's amiss, a nervous Wes shoots and kills him.
You said do it clean, I did it clean.
After.
There really is no honor among thieves. Soon, Wes notices the buyer's text on Lazarus's phone and panics until Cash calms him down and takes control of the situation. However, a few minutes later, the buyers arrive, and just as Cash feared, start questioning Lazarus's absence. Cash and Wes try to calm the suspicious buyers and assure them they have nothing to worry about, to no avail. Sensing the rising tension and hoping to avoid a meaningless bloodbath at all costs, Cash tries to reason with the men.
This is out of character.
However, despite Cash's best efforts, all hell breaks loose as the men open fire unexpectedly. After minutes of brutal gunfight that ends up killing all the buyers except a young dealer, Cash tries to salvage what's left of the deal without killing the survivor.
You take the drugs, we take the money just like we planned. You go on living, we go on living. What do you say?
Gotta give props to Cash for going the extra mile to get things done peacefully. Relieved by the young man's decision, Cash carries on with the deal and sends the lone survivor on his way. Then, Cash and Wes load up the bags full of money and head back. On the way, Cash and Wes burn their truck to destroy evidence that can link them back to any of the crimes and call Finney to pick them up. Later, as Cash and Finney wash Finney's truck to remove evidence, Cash explains the details of his deal with Big Cat to Finney, who shares his concerns that it may all be too good to be true. After everything, would Big Cat let him go scot-free and let him and his family live in peace? He didn't think so, as everything he knew about the cruel woman disputed that. Hence, after thinking long and hard, Cash decides he needs a backup plan to secure his family's safety and contacts Deputy Sheriff Duke. Deputy Sheriff Duke arrives at the meeting spot expecting the worst as he remembers Cash's criminal history and is quite surprised to hear Cash's offer to work together and bring Big Cat down. After some discussion, the Deputy Sheriff agrees to honor Cash's request that he must remain an anonymous source in the case for the sake of his family's safety and promises to speak to his DA friend to find out exactly what they need to get a conviction. The men then seal their agreement to work together with a friendly handshake.
I got you on that. I give you my word.
A few days later, Cash and Finney take Savannah target practice and have a fun day, teaching her different techniques.
All right, second ring.
Elsewhere, Deputy Sheriff Duke stops one of Big Cat's drug dealers for speeding and, after ignoring her bribe, proceeds to investigate.
License and registration, please.
There you go.
However, instead of following the deputy's orders, the dealer tries to attack the officer, and an altercation ensues. Luckily, the deputy quickly reacts, subdues the woman, and cuffs her as he continues inspecting her car and finds a trunk full of drugs. Excited that he has finally found some evidence that can be linked to Big Cat, Deputy Sheriff Duke calls Cash and leaves a message on his voicemail.
You just f***ed up big time!
That evening, just as Cash gets home and listens to the deputy's message, the Buck and the Doe arrive and order him to take a ride with them.
I don't like you.
Well, we don't think much of you either, so I guess we'll just have to risk it.
Cash reluctantly gets in the car, and as they drive away, he starts wondering what this was all about and tries to think of ways to protect himself if things go wrong. Then, after a few minutes of driving, the trio arrives at Big Cat's mansion, which is filled with all of her associates. Then, once everyone's there, Big Cat gathers her crew and makes announcements.
To my baby boy, Zeke.
Overwhelmed and highly suspicious of everything, Cash leaves the celebrations behind, goes to the living room, and as he stands by the fireplace, the very same one he was forced to burn his right hand over, in the name of freedom, all the memories of the painful night come flashing back. I bet those scars don't seem worth it now. Then, following Big Cat's orders for everyone to gather and watch the special entertainment for the festive night, Cash rejoins the group. As everyone waits with anticipation, Big Cat wheels in a tied-up and severely beaten-up Deputy Sheriff Duke and reveals him to the excited crowd. Cash stands frozen as if he saw a ghost and suddenly feels suffocated by the weight of the revelation. Then, as he tries to process what lies before his eyes, questions fill his head. How did the deputy get here? How can he possibly help his new partner? Then, as per their boss's order, the Buck and the Doe brutally beat up the officer, while the rest of the crew whimpers in fear and the room goes so silent that a pin drop can be heard.
I got it all laid out for you.
Then, unfazed by everything, Big Cat continues to torture the officer and asks for a volunteer to finish the job. Meanwhile, standing in the back, Cash fights an internal battle to keep his sanity in light of the horrific brutality and decides that the only thing he can do for the deputy right now is end his torture and pain by any means necessary. And if that means killing him to put him out of his misery, that seems rather justified. Hence, momentarily silencing the chaos brewing in his mind, Cash steps up.
Just let me take him out of the woods. I'll finish him there.
However, Big Cat ignores Cash's suggestion and, in one swift movement, slits the deputy's throat and kills him. Shocked, Cash takes a moment to gather himself and makes a daring announcement.
You're done.
Yeah.
That night, Cash returns to his shack and replays everything in his mind. After putting together all that has happened so far, he decides that since violence seems to be the only language Big Cat speaks, he can no longer afford to shy away from it. And with the deputy no longer in the picture, he decides he must take justice into his own hands and prepare for war, as it seems the county is suddenly too small for both him and Big Cat. The next day, the buck goes through the deputy's phone, learns of his partnership with Cash, and immediately reports it to Big Cat, who declares war on Cash. Now, sober and seeing things clearly, Finney wakes up early that Sunday and prepares to go to church for the first time since his wife's burial. However, he soon receives a call from a distressed Cash, who reveals that he will be busy collecting evidence on Big Cat all day, and after refusing his help, advises him to go to church with Savannah. Hence, Cash goes around the small county surveilling Big Cat's numerous farms and making a detailed note of their location. Meanwhile, Savannah and Finney reach the church and quietly sit down to learn the sermon. Upon seeing Finney, the pastor is overjoyed and gives a specialized sermon on guilt and anger, which proves to be a little too much for Finney, who steps out shortly after to get some air. At the end of the service, Finney reunites with his daughter and sincerely apologizes to her for being consumed by guilt and failing to be there for her, which she wholeheartedly accepts. Moments later, the pastor joyfully welcomes Finney and promises that he and his congregation are always there for him. Then, as everyone proceeds to leave, Finney offers to take Savannah to lunch at the local diner, and the duo starts walking to their car. However, out of nowhere, Big Cat's goons arrive and start demanding to know where Cash is, before chasing Finney and Savannah around the parking lot, separating them and beating Finney to a pulp. Luckily, the pastor soon arrives on the scene and rushes through the terrified crowd to rescue Savannah from the goons, who quickly flee the area. Moments later, due to his severe injuries, Finney is taken to the hospital, where he tragically succumbs to his brutal injuries and dies. Elsewhere, after hearing the events that transpired at the parking lot, Sheriff Hollister visits Big Cat at her mansion.
Saying I need you to make it a little easier on me. People are watching now.
The very authorities meant to protect and serve conspiring with the devil? There's no place to go. Elsewhere, Cash arrives at the hospital and is devastated to hear of Finney's death and summons all his strength to remain calm and comfort his distraught niece before asking the pastor to look after her and setting out to deliver some justice of his own. Cash then trails the doe around town, and once he reaches an isolated farm, waits for the perfect opportunity to challenge him to a gunfight. After a brutal fight, Cash kills the doe, but gets knocked out in the process. Later, Cash wakes up and, utterly relieved no one has discovered him, flees the area. Seconds later, the police and Big Cat arrive at the scene and learn of what had transpired.
Found the family's truck in the woods.
Elsewhere, on the hunt for Cash, the buck and his men barge into the pastor's house, demand he tell them Savannah's whereabouts, and start beating him up relentlessly when he refuses to cooperate. Savannah hears this commotion from her hiding place and, hoping to save the pastor's life, makes a bold decision.
Smart girl. She just saved your life.
Savannah is really brave. I definitely couldn't do that. Later, after a treacherous journey on foot, Cash reaches the pastor's house and is alarmed to find the front door open. Prepared to find the worst-case scenario, Cash cautiously enters and finds the pastor, who profusely apologizes for failing to protect Savannah, preparing to join the war.
They took her from me. I'm sorry.
Glad Cash has an ally. Then, fully geared, the pastor and Cash speed to the law firm and kidnap Zeke in broad daylight. This news reaches Big Cat, who was in the middle of personally babysitting Savannah, and before she can react, she receives a call from Cash.
We met at the Rock Plan, Avenue 280.
Following the news, Big Cat assigns Wes to monitor the tied-up Savannah and leaves the room to devise a plan. Elsewhere, Cash also adapts to the change of plans and sneaks in through the back of the mansion, while the pastor drives through the front gate, enters the compound with Zeke, and demands a trade.
Hell, now you're speaking my language.
Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Savannah uses Wes's moment of distraction to slowly and cautiously cut her ties on the living room fireplace. It's quite poetic that Savannah gets her freedom from the same fireplace her uncle got his. Then, forced to agree to a simultaneous trade to save her son, Big Cat gives out her orders.
That happens, I'll drop him down the road.
However, to the shock of everyone, before the men can return to the mansion and bring out Savannah, she unties herself and kills Wes with a shotgun. The unexpected gunshot sends shockwaves through the estate, and all hell breaks loose as everyone runs everywhere. And soon, a gunfight ensues. After a lengthy and intense battle, the pastor is severely injured and passes out while Zeke escapes. Then, as Zeke tries to run to safety, he's caught in the crossfire and is injured, which forces him to retreat to the woods and face the agitated guard dogs. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the teenager holds her own and leads the buck in a chase around while pausing to shoot back at him occasionally. Luckily, as the chase escalates, Cash makes his way into the mansion through the back door and takes his niece's place, facing off with the buck. Then, after an intense battle, the men run out of ammunition, get into a physical fight in which Cash stabs the buck to death. Outside, Big Cat hears Zeke's screams from the woods, rushes over and is heartbroken to find him dead, and cries over his body, apologizing for not protecting him. Then, filled with burning vengeance, she marches towards the house to finish the war for good. Inside the mansion, Big Cat finds an injured Cash being helped up by Savannah and opens heavy fire, severely injuring him. Terrified, Savannah drags her uncle to momentary safety, and as she frantically tries to figure out what to do, Cash gives her a stern order, while he opts to stay back and await certain death.
Savannah, go! Get the hell out!
Unable to walk away from her only family, Savannah returns back unexpectedly, sneaks up on Big Cat, stabs her to death, and rescues her uncle and the community that has been suffering at the hands of the cruel woman and her insatiable greed. A few months later, both the pastor and Cash recover well. The pastor returns to the church where he continues giving Sunday services and teaching the community. Meanwhile, Cash and Savannah continue looking out for one another on the ranch and peacefully tend to their animals.